Hello and welcome to the Voices to End Hunger podcast, the official podcast of the Alliance to End Hunger. I'm your host, Minerva Delgado. Today, I'm speaking with Alliance to End Hunger President Eric Mitchell about the state of hunger in the U.S. and around the world, the challenging environment we find ourselves in, and what this all means for our collective efforts to end hunger everywhere. Eric, this is the very first episode of Voices to End Hunger. As a team, we decided that it made a lot of sense for the Alliance to End Hunger to host a podcast. Welcome.
Glad to be here. I'm excited to start off our first ever podcast episode.
Well, I'm excited to have you too. And to level set for folks who may not be familiar with these issues, we'll be talking about food insecurity and hunger, and we'll be using those words interchangeably. But what we're talking about is the lack of access to enough food to live an active, healthy life. And I'll give you the most recent numbers from 2023. In the U.S., the United States Department of Agriculture tells us that 47.4 million people in the U.S. were food insecure, including 13.8 million children. Globally, the State of Food Security and Nutrition report found that 757 million people face hunger around the world. I've given you the basic numbers, but how would you describe the state of food insecurity in the U.S. and around the world?
Well, Minerva, I'll be honest. The numbers are quite bleak. Hunger and food insecurity has gone up around the world and in the U.S. And mainly it's because of factors that we've seen. We are on the back end, or we dealt with the COVID pandemic a number of years ago, and as you know, that had a huge economic impact here in the United States, but globally, where people were losing their jobs, food insecurity went up, and malnutrition went up across the board. Also around the world, we're in very difficult times with different conflicts, wars happening. You're having severe weather happening around the world, and all this is impacting the ability to be able to bring food, be able to grow food, be able to afford food, and the ability for families to be able to take care of themselves. So that's kind of like what we're talking about, these root causes of the driving factor of food insecurity and hunger. Those are the things that's really driving from it. Now, in certain places, we've had good policies put into place that has helped to ensure that the numbers do not increase, drastically and kind of level off, I would say. But there's still challenges that we're facing today, causing food insecurity globally to continually to rise.
So there's a lot that people have pulling at their attention. And for folks who aren't regularly in this space like you and I, why is it important to talk about hunger?
Well, I mean, look, we got the moral argument. If one believes that the one thing that makes us all unique as human beings is that the need to nourish ourselves, the need to take care of ourselves and our communities. And if you believe that everyone should have the ability to be able to do that basic need in nourishing themselves and their family, then addressing hunger should be a moral obligation. But without even putting that to the side, when you talk about the impacts of food insecurity, families and individuals who are going through food insecurity or hunger are less productive. They're more likely to have severe healthcare complications. They're usually tied to other chronic diseases. You will also find that that you have less of access of education. There's usually an increase of poverty. There's and level of instability just around the world. When you talk about like the crises that we're seeing in different parts of the world, where you're seeing drastic migration flows, you're seeing wars, different conflicts and instability. Food insecurity tends to be one of those driving causes. And so you have the moral argument of why we need to address hunger, but you also have the argument of stability, security, and at the end of the day, trying to ensure that people have the resources they need to be productive citizens.
Thank you. So, turning to what's happening right now in Washington, D.C., a lot has been going on since the beginning of this new Trump administration. Executive orders, memos, retracted memos, court challenges. All these things have impacted the food security space and the advocacy community in which we're embedded. We know this has been covered in the media, so people are probably aware broadly of what's going on. So, this has been really a rough time for the anti hunger community faced by these political hurdles. Why?
Well, I mean, I'll look at I'll talk about it in this way. When a new presidential administration comes in, they have their priorities. They have things that they want to focus on, and they also want to prioritize limited federal resources to accomplishing those priorities. Uh, the Trump administration came in with an American First agenda. Well, what that agenda means is that we want to ensure that everything that we do helps to lift up and improve the lives of American citizens. On paper, I don't think anyone would want to argue with that. The issue, the devil is in the details of how you actually accomplish that. And so, what we have seen over the past, I guess, 2 months, is that there has been a shift in priorities. A shift in priorities as it relates to our foreign assistance, which we will dive into in a second, but also a shift in how resources are going to be divvied out for our federal nutrition programs as well. There's a huge effort to want to bring things back down to the states. One could argue that states still had a level of choice and flexibility in how they administer programs. But with that said, there is a huge emphasis in wanting to focus on our domestic nutrition programs, particularly the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which we know as SNAP. That is the largest nutrition program that feeds millions of families, millions of Americans. Over 40 million Americans use the SNAP program to help do just that, be able to afford the foods they need to take care of themselves and their families. There's been policies put forward that will either restrict how those funds will be used and what a family can or cannot buy, or there have been proposals to shift some of that cost to the states. We could talk about the policies around what that means, but I think one of the things that we want to do as our community is talk about this from an agenda of saying we agree that we need to ensure that everyone is able to take care of themselves and their family. We also believe that our food should be healthy, and people should be able to have access to those healthy foods. What we would say is let's use these programs in a way to ensure that those healthier foods are affordable and available to our most vulnerable families. And so that's the agenda that we're trying to put forward. On the global side, they have really shifted the priorities of the role that the U.S. will play in the global stage, particularly as it relates to humanitarian and development aid. There's around 750 million people in this world who are faced with food insecurity. Millions of people in this world are faced with the threats of famine, severe malnutrition, and the administration, as part of its America First agenda, has taken I would say, a very controversial step in freezing foreign assistance that has been administered in previous years. That included, in many cases, foreign assistance relates to food aid. Now, there have been a series of court hearings and advocacy efforts trying to ensure that the money that's related to food assistance is unfrozen. And there's still battles on how that will happen. But what has happened as a result of the pause, and it's been basically a pause pretty much since day one of the administration's in January 20th, started January 20th. What we've seen is that there have been food shortages throughout the world. Organizations who have spent years in pre-positioning food to make sure that it gets to the people that need when they need it, is rotting at ports and in storage facilities, mainly because the apparatus and the infrastructure that would take to actually move food from the farmer to the person in need has been decimated. And as a result, you're going to see, and we are seeing, increased hunger globally. You're also seeing a level of instability in certain regions as well as a result of this aid ending. So organizations like World Food Program and others are having to shut down offices around the world. Many nonprofits who are delivering vaccination, food assistance, education opportunities for millions of people around the world, millions of children around the world are closing their doors and having to lay people off or put people on furlough. And what this is happening is creating a vacuum now where the U.S. no longer is the leader in providing nourishing food and protecting the lives of millions of people. And it's also having an impact effect here in the States. Oftentimes, what we don't see or we don't talk about is what the U.S. role is in our foreign aid. Many of the commodities that are sent overseas obviously are grown here in the United States. They're taken from the farm to loading facilities with U.S. trucking companies. They're put on U.S. ships, taken to ports across the world. All that pipeline, if you will, has stopped, and so it's going to be hard just to turn that faucet back on. So it's having an economic impact that we're seeing here. This is a real challenge for many of us, and I think that this is something that needs to be highlighted.
In the early days of the second Trump administration, Secretary of State Rubio said that foreign assistance must meet three criteria: make America safer, make America stronger, and make America more prosperous. Beyond just looking at global hunger, you've stated that programs that address global and domestic food security easily pass this test. How so?
Well, what is often not discussed, like I said earlier, is the role that U.S. industries play in our food assistance programs, both U.S. and globally. Again, we all recognize that all the food that we buy on our shelves, food that we cook in our kitchens, come from a farm. Oftentimes, it comes from a small local farmer who is committing their lives to providing the nourishing foods that we all eat today. Well, the same thing goes with our domestic nutrition programs. The U.S. government has programs in place where, for example, school systems and school districts can buy fruits and vegetables from local farmers to provide healthy foods for school-aged children, or they provide resources for food banks to buy food from local farmers as well, so they can provide healthier, nutritious options for low-income families. Funding like that is at risk right now under the administration that we are constantly, we are going to be advocating and pushing back on. Foreign assistance is food aid. Often commodities are grown here in the U.S. Through wheat, rice, beans, what have you, are sent overseas as staple items for families in refugee camps in communities decimated by war, to farmers who are dealing with the onslaught of a year-long drought or severe flooding. Those resources are brought to those families to be able to cook meals for themselves and for themselves and their communities. Often this is coming from U.S. companies, U.S. farmers, as well as U.S. universities are providing that type of research needed to develop smarter agriculture techniques so that farmers can be more resilient. And so, as I talk about food security, yes, food security does fall under those categories, because again, when you think about making America more prosperous, you're using U.S. companies, U.S. universities, thought leadership, as well as U.S. agriculture to help provide those resources in times of emergency, as well as a long-term assurance to help create stronger capacities and trading partners overseas, making America more secure. When there's food insecurity around the world, there's also instability around the world. And as we talk about migration and other things here domestically, well, what are some of the reasons why people are risking their lives to come to the United States, unauthorized or not? Oftentimes it's because of threats of food insecurity. And so when folks are able to provide for themselves and their family back at home, then they stay at home.
And I think that stronger, and we haven't talked about this, but I think America's leadership role in the world around food security and humanitarian and development aid put us in a position where we were a leader among countries,
Right.
a leader in this field where other countries are really looking to us. So I that would be for me one of the arguments to say that global food aid made America stronger.
Yeah, and when you look at these things through building trade partners as well as building, increasing and strengthening democracies around the world, which at the end of the day helps to influence, helps to strengthen American influence by creating stronger communities. It gives opportunities for our companies to invest in those countries. It gives an opportunity for our thought leadership to work in collaboration with universities and thought leaders in those countries, helps build a stronger society and stronger will. And all this together, it really does, in our view, really help to crystallize, the American First agenda that we think this administration is trying to move forward.
Thank you. Yes, it seems incongruent that when there's such strong arguments that these programs, global security programs, make America more prosperous because we benefit from these programs, and also safer because we're helping to reduce food insecurity and instability around the world, that we would see some of the steps that this administration has taken. You were talking about, farmers producing fresh foods um, for schools and food banks, and they we have seen in the last week $1 billion in contracts cut for farmers who are supplying their local schools and local food banks with fresh produce. We've seen a lot of other impacts, especially on the global side, with the dismantling of USAID. Can you tell me what have you been hearing from our members?
Well, our membership is a diverse group of national organizations and ranging from all types of sectors, as well as academic institutions and foundations. And we all are committed to one goal, which is the goal of pushing for policies that will move us towards the path of ending hunger and malnutrition. And so there's concern across the board around how these policies could impact that mission. One thing I will say is that because our membership is a representation of all those different sectors, they're seeing it from the lens of their respective sectors. So our corporate partners, for example, our retail partners, they're concerned about the provisions that are moving forward around, SNAP choice. In other words, restricting, how I like to say is restricting what people can or cannot buy using SNAP benefits. So I say the SNAP unchoice for real. But their concern is like logistically, and economically, it's not something that is even feasible for many of our retail partners to even be able to implement, because when you look at the number of food items that are on the shelf, limiting and restricting what people can and cannot buy or what's eligible using SNAP programs makes it unsustainable from those companies. Plus, you talk about the economic benefit that for every SNAP dollar that's spent, that amount of that gets poured back into the communities. That's an economic impact, in what is in how these federal programs are actually fueling our economy, which I think is something that needs to be said more. We talk about how farmers will lose potential revenue and funding streams as a result of the shifting of not only just USAID, but just the shifting of food policy in general, and the freeze of food aid. If we don't look at ways to create a infrastructure for a strong food aid system, that again puts a higher burden on our farmers who aren't able to sell all their products here in the United States. And then you also talk about just the other connecting factors, such as the other industries that are impacting, whether it's our education sector, whether it's transportation sector, what have you, healthcare system. When folks are when people are at risk of food insecurity, they have higher, like I said, higher healthcare costs. They're going to the doctor more. They're faced with chronic diseases and other conditions as a result of food insecurity. And so, this is becoming a tripling effect for our society.
And I think just to pause here for a second, one of the other impacts I think would be good to talk about example where they got a stop work order, but they produced life-saving food. So they were then, that order was rescinded. Um, there was a lot of confusion there when they finally got production back up to find that all of the partners that they shipped their food to get it into the communities, into the community health centers, that they had lost their contracts.
Right.
So the breaking of the supply chain, right? So yes, there was this. So yes, they kind of reversed the freeze for this emergency food assistance, but
Correct.
but they had broken the supply chain along the way. So what is the point of having food that's produced that doesn't get to where it needs to go?
Right. And to your point, and I think that that's one of the things that needs to be highlighted more, just in general, is we don't I don't really understand like what the thought process was in making these decisions. And I to be honest, I don't think there was much of a thought process. I think what policymakers or the decision makers are saying is not really knowing that they just see that this program is something that's being given overseas or money is being given overseas. But the reality is a large share of that money is spent here in the United States. And so you talk about, for example, and some of our other partners, they are working with local farmers and local companies to produce a product here in the United States that's being shipped overseas. And they're working in contracts with truckers and other groups who have their own contracts with USAID to be able to deliver that product from the port to the actual recipient further in country. When the contracts are canceled or when the funding is frozen, not only is the production of that food is frozen, but the distribution of that food is also impacted. And that's that ripple effect that we try to lift up, is that it's more than just us giving food away to low income people. It's more than just quote unquote welfare programs. This has an economic impact that only hurts the recipient, but it hurts the groups and companies and the employees that are producing these products, distributing these products, and actually and trying to implement the program. And most of the time, these aren't just federal workers that we're talking about. These are people that work for private companies, nonprofit groups, and are doing something that they feel really matters, but also are doing this job because it also feeds themselves and their families.
So right now is a difficult environment for advocates. It feels like we're not quite getting across in our messaging. It feels like everything we've been working for that has been effective is being torn down. As advocates, are we failing to get our messages across, or are we just being ignored? What could our community be doing better?
Well, look, we always recognize that there's challenges. There's always a challenge, and we have a long hill to climb. Are we being ignored? No, I won't say that we're being ignored, but what is happening is that you have to get above the noise. You have to get above the rhetoric and the noise that kind of gets the media attention. Our issue is not something that is going to garner media attention every day until a catastrophe happens. There has been some cases, particularly on the global side, where we've been able to make that case around children who are suffering from severe malnutrition, for example, as a result of USAID funding freeze. You're hearing stories about disturbances in Ethiopia as a result of food aid not being delivered, or World Food Program dividing their rations as a result of lesser money coming in. So then that way they're not able to purchase as much food. You are getting those stories as well. But I have faith that eventually, particularly here on the domestic side, um, people will start seeing what these impacts actually really mean to our economy, to the industries that matter here. Agriculture, for example, universities here who we're receiving federal dollars for research around food security. Development, those being canceled out. Those are actual constituencies that vote for the members of Congress and the senators here. And so I think what we need to do as a community is to we need to think creatively. We need to think, what are new collaborations and coalitions that we should be forming that we haven't formed before? The Alliance in Hunger, I mean, this is not new to us. It's in our name. We are the Alliance in Hunger. The premise of the creation of our organization was because there was an understanding that it was going to take more than just one sector alone to truly combat hunger and malnutrition. But even within our organization, we every day we're thinking about where new partnerships that we could be forming. And so we want to strengthen our relationship with farm groups, with the ag sector, with companies who are impacted by some of these policies, um, and cast a wide net, if you will, to really think about what it takes to really broaden this coalition, to really show that it's not just one sector alone who cares about these issues, but across the board, number of thoughts and individuals who care on these issues, and so it's going to take some time.
Let's turn to a different topic. So, just this is our inaugural podcast. So, what are you hoping to see, or more specifically, hear through this new program? We have a very special coalition, as you mentioned, including universities, corporations, foundations, faith networks of all kinds, international NGOs and national nonprofits, that folks would recognize. Um, what what are you excited to hear about from our partners?
Well, we are the voices to end hunger. So that means it's not going to be the Eric Mitchell and Minerva Delgado show. It's really going to be us bringing partners in to tell their stories. Sometimes we're going to talk about policy. Today was heavily focused on policy, and we are an advocacy organization. But even then, I think what I also want this to be, and what we plan for this to be, is to bring real life stories around this policy. Representatives from our member organizations who care about these issues, who are talking about the work that they're doing to lift up the goals to end hunger in their communities and through their work. We want to use this as a vehicle for them to be able to express that. We may actually bring elected officials on to talk about their priorities and what they see and how they envision the goals to end hunger from their lane, both Democrats and Republicans. We welcome all walks of life. We may bring other special guests who are just unique characters and champions in the anti-hunger movement. People who are part of our local community partners. We have a coalition called the Hunger Free Communities Network. So I would envision, rising stars from within that cohort of 50 plus organizations around the country who are doing work in their respective communities to help address food insecurity locally, highlight some of the work that they're doing. So I really, this is a blank canvas. I think we're going to be painting as we go. But as I am, and as you are having conversations out here in the world, and we're talking with people every day, I hear somebody who's like, "Man, you would be a great guest on our new podcast, The Voices to End Hunger." And so, I know this is the first episode. I know episode 2 is going to be very unique as well, as the kind of first step in telling that story about the work that they're doing and how that's connected to the goals of ending hunger. So I'm excited. We've been talking about this for quite a while. We finally was able to kick it off, and I'm glad to be the test case in our first ever episode.
You're a very special first guest. That's what you are. But before we wrap, given the moment that we're in, the stakes are so high for folks who are facing food insecurity in the US and around the world. What is your ask of folks listening to the podcast right now?
Right now, today, I don't know what day this is actually going to get published, but between now and April, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to call your member of Congress, and call them on two things. One, we need to protect our global food security and nutrition programs. And we also need to ensure that we do not weaken our federal nutrition programs here in the United States. There's going to be some policies brought forward over the next few weeks that's going to really be challenging. And it's really going to take a concerted effort of all of us to raise our voices. We may have some wins, we may get some bruises, but I think at the end of the day, we got to continue to keep fighting and continue to keep punching. And I do think that you know the next few weeks will be critical for us to really let them know from kind of what they say, the shot over the bow, that there is a constituency out here that cares about what you're doing and is willing to hold you accountable.
Thank you. A huge thanks to Alliance to End Hunger President Eric Mitchell for joining us today. That's it for this episode of Voices to End Hunger. I'm your host, Minerva Delgado. See you in April.